Well, good day to you. It is September the 20th. I hope wherever you are having a wonderful day. My name is Gary Willing, and I want to welcome you to SOP Save Our Planet. I would also like to do two things before we get going. And this is the only advertisement that will interrupt this video, okay? Because I don't get paid for this. It's just something that I think is important to talk about, and I always talk about it at the beginning of these videos because of the importance of it. And that is, if you want to know more about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, you want to know more about what I'm talking about here, about the priorities of the teacher, or even if you want to see if any of this is true for you. If you have a little bit of an open mind, you have a little time, you don't even need any money because all the information is free, I'm hoping and I'm encouraging you to check out some of the information on some of these websites that I provided links for in the description portion of these videos. Now, keep in mind, you can do your investigation however you want to do it and go to wherever you want to go to get your investigation. But the Share International site is the best link to get the best background information in one spot about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom and what he means for humanity, and of course to see if this is even true for you or not. And I would be satisfied with whatever the result is if you took the time to at least investigate this information for yourself. All right, now the second thing is, and this is also free, is to join the discussion. Post a comment, let me know what you think. If you have a question you want to ask me, post your question in the comment section or email me, searchforsigns@mail.com. Okie dokie. Now, before I get into the question and answer portion of this video, I did want to circle back around and talk about the last video I put up that's entitled Luke 6:27 through 36. And very rarely, if ever, will you ever hear me mention a biblical verse and use the book of the Bible that it's in and use the numbers to reference that, because I don't keep track of that stuff. I don't try to remember that. I just try to remember the central point of the verse and try to apply it to my life. But this one is crucial, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, because there are a lot of fundamentalist Christians that listen to these videos. Of course, they don't agree with what I have to say, but I wanted to bring this up as a point that I've been noticing, and it's something that I think we all need to be looking at. And that is because that one particular verse, Luke 6:27 through 36, as somebody who perhaps doesn't identify as a fundamentalist Christian, doesn't go to church every Sunday, but has a general understanding of what's written in the Bible, would say that is core and central to the teachings and the truths that Jesus was trying to teach 2,000 years ago. And really core to who and what he was as a person. And the world teacher, not only for the Christians, but for the whole world. But it's a verse that's so familiar to every Christian that is out there, that even if they don't know the verse and number by heart, once they read what it says, they would go, oh, of course, I've heard this 100,000 times. And if it's so familiar, and this is the point that I'm trying to bring up, I'm not trying to create any kind of absolute truth about what I'm saying about this and what I'm noticing in our own culture today, but I do think it's important to look at this because it's true what they say. What you see in the world is who and what you are. What you believe the world to be is really based on your own beliefs. As Maitreya would put it, as man so relates to man, does man relate to God. Okay, so if there's a lack of love amongst us humanity, then those people who believe in a God, their God probably, they might say that God is all love, but the way that they think and the way that they express that God to be is probably anything but love, is my point. And there is a tremendous, it's very rare to find the truth of this verse, somebody trying to apply it to their life, especially today. And I even heard someone who did reference this verse years ago to a MAGA person in church, and the person said this does not apply to what's going on today. Okay, so, and we shouldn't even look, and they were even saying we shouldn't even look to this verse for anything because it doesn't apply to today. So what's the point of even talking about it? The verse is love thine enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and those kind of things. And don't expect anything in return. Do unto others as they would have them do unto you. I mean, we've all heard this before, right? Especially in the West. And yet, over the last week and a half, I've been listening to all these different viewpoints of what happened with Charlie Kirk, what it means, and where do we go from here? And a lot of people are referencing the Bible and these kind of things. And it's not only with Charlie Kirk's murder, but it's even just what's been going on in the United States for the last few years. And not one person has mentioned that verse. And why? Why is nobody mentioning this verse? And I think it's because we are not looking, because that verse is about love. It's about loving unconditionally. And we are not trying to apply the central teachings of Jesus' life to our own life. And yet we claim to be Christian. And this is a problem. This is a problem. And if more people were trying to apply unconditional love to their own life, they would have remembered that verse and brought it up. And this is my point. And I'm not trying to say that this in a point of pride in myself, but learning how to love unconditionally is something that I try to do every day. I fail miserably all the time, but yet I pick myself up and I try to do it again. And I pick myself up and I try to do it again. So I'm not claiming to love people unconditionally, because I certainly don't. And one of the things in that verse which that really touched a nerve was when he said to be merciful to those who are ungrateful. And you know what I thought about for myself? I thought about all the Atlanta drivers that just get under my skin when you let them in. When you finally break down and you let that person break in line and they don't even stick up a hand to thank you, it burns me every time. And then I remember this, when I read this verse, I was like, you know what? I need to try to be understanding of those people and try to love those people who are ungrateful for me, just letting them alone. I know it sounds petty, but it really, I saw myself in that too. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not standing here on a soapbox trying to say that I do it perfectly, because I don't think anybody does. But to apply it to your life is I would say, based on the fact that nobody's talking about it, based on the fact that people who even identify with being a Christian and read the Bible every day and go to church every Sunday, nobody's mentioning this verse, because nobody's trying to apply that verse to their life, or they would have. They're talking about it in other things. And even some of my so-called Christian brethren and friends and coworkers that we were talking about this with Charlie Kirk, they mentioned, having more guns available to people, right? And then when I brought this verse up, it kind of, I could see it in their eyes. It was like, they didn't even think about that either. They did not even think about that verse. Love thine enemies, do good to those who hate you. So even if what MAGA is thinking is true about the left, which I don't think is true, even if it was true, that they were out there persecuting them, according to what Jesus is saying, they should be loving them. They should be doing good to them, even though that they hate them. And what better way of showing yourself as a Christian but to love those who hate you? Because that's exactly what Jesus did. And Jesus was the perfect example of that. And I talk about it all the time. I am not identifying as a Democrat or a Republican. I am somewhere that can't fit into either of those slots. There are things on the left that I agree with. Of course, the need for to reduce pollution and have more regulation on companies is something I very much agree with. Having more social, programs that feed the poor and help the poor, I am right on board with, which is a reason why I vote for Democrat in most national races, because they at least talk about it. They don't do anything about it, but at least they're talking about doing something. And I'm always hoping that every time I vote for them that they do something about it, but I'm always let down. But anyway, I can't really identify with either party. And I don't claim to be a Republican or a Democrat. But the thing that the Republicans do that I just can't abide by, even though there are some things in the Republican platform that I can go, I can kind of get on board with that. But the thing I can't abide by, the thing that actually I find extremely painful coming from the right, is they've hijacked two things that I love dearly. One is my love of this country, and they claim that if you do not vote for what they vote for, you are un-American or unpatriotic. And this has started couple decades ago, and it happened, I started noticing it right after 9/11, when people such as myself were speaking out against the war in Iraq, which the Republicans were the ones that were really pushing for. It was said even in people in my own life, even in people who I love in my own family, some of them, they were claiming that I was, and they were calling me unpatriotic and un-American because I was speaking out against the war in Iraq. And people were doing it on the news and so forth, and those kind of things. So they hijacked patriotism. You have to vote for them or you're unpatriotic, un-American, which is totally not true. And the Democrats don't do that. They've never once said that if you don't vote for Barack Obama, you're unpatriotic. They've never once said that, right? Now, the other thing is, they've also hijacked Christian values and Christianity as a whole. And this causes me an extreme amount of angst and pain because I love the truths in the Bible and I hold that dear, and I've tried to apply the teachings of Jesus to my own life. Like I said, I fail miserably, but I've tried. I don't go to church every Sunday. I do go to church from time to time, and I listen to the pastors in the pulpit, and I either take what they say and try to apply it to my life or not, or whatever, But I am not a identified Christian, but I am trying my best to live the way that I think that Jesus lived his life, which is the reason why I see this information as true. The need to bring about justice, the need to bring about peace. I think if Jesus were alive today, which I know he is, but if Jesus in Palestine was alive today, he would be speaking about these same issues. And that's really fundamentally where it is. And the Republicans have hijacked that. And they said, if you don't vote for our candidate, you're voting against God. And I've heard them say this about Trump, for instance. If you speak out against Trump, you're speaking out against God. If you're against Trump, you're against God. And there's literally no truth to that. None. None whatsoever. And the Democrats don't do that. They've never once said, if you don't vote for Biden, you're voting against God. They've never said that, right? And so as much criticisms I have toward the Democratic Party, that's one thing that they've not fallen into. And it's going to be unbelievably difficult to unroot this conditioning that the Republicans are putting on the American public about Republican values are God's values, because they're really not. In fact, sometimes they go, and most of them go completely opposite of what Jesus talked about. Such as this one verse, love thine enemies, do good to those who, when was the last time any Republican candidate was talking like that? And yet they claim to be Christian, and yet they have all the memorabilia and things hanging from their neck, the jewelry hanging from their neck that are supposed to signify that they're Christian, but yet they don't have that in their heart to say. And that was my point about the last video, and I think it's important to look at, and to think about and to keep in mind. And of course, try to apply to your life that truth of love thine enemies, do good to those who hate you. And you will hear those same words coming out of Maitreya's mouth, to forgive those who do harm to you. Ben's master talked about it in an article, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof, which is another Christian axiom that we don't follow, which has to do with forgiveness. He actually wrote that article the month before 9/11, of course, seeing that what was going to happen and the retaliatory, to try to halt the retaliatory actions of the United States government at the time, which of course they didn't listen to. But here is the hopeful thing that I want to say before I get into the questions. I've also started to notice that there are some figures in the media that are Republican, and our media is representative of the people. So they're representing a group of people. Maybe not all the people, but they're representing a group of the people on the right. So there must be something going on within a lot of people on the right that's having them say this along with, because they're saying this too. But people such as Marjorie Taylor Greene have spoken out against the genocide in Israel, spoken out against the corruption of the Political Action Committee and the lobbyist AIPAC, which lobby our politicians on behalf of Israel and really have them in their back pocket, and some of the nefarious things that they've done in order to influence our own politicians to keep giving them money and so forth. She's spoken out against it. And Tucker Carlson is another one. Candace Owens is another one. And probably one of the biggest fringe right-wingers who I think is a total nut job, but Nick Fuentes is even saying some things, and I'm going, yes, that's true, right? I, of course, don't agree with everything that they're saying, right? But I think, and this is something that I'm not putting out there as an absolute, so don't take this as something that I think that is absolutely true. It could, it's something just to think about and inquire about and look through yourself to see if it's true for you. But it seems to me that the situation in Palestine, for instance, and the evil that's been perpetrated on the Palestinian people, that perhaps Maitreya and these masters are using that evil that we're doing to each other as an opportunity to help open the hearts of some of us, especially those on the right who were seem to be completely cut off to the suffering in the world. And they're starting to notice, at least, and talk about, at least, the evil that's been perpetrated on there. Because it wasn't something that they talked about when we went into Iraq. And I noticed it a few months ago, actually probably almost a year ago, when the election was going on. And I had a coworker / friend at work who's an extreme right-winger. And she and I were going back and forth about the different candidates, of course. And I'm talking, and one of the reasons why I've never voted Republican in a national race is because they've always been the war hawks. And I was talking about this. And well, that's kind of an antiquated idea. Because the MAGA folks do not want more war. I was thinking all along that they wanted more war. And if Trump said we need to go into war into this country, they would go right along with it. Well, no, they're not. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of them are turning on Trump because he unilaterally attacked Iran a few months back. And what's been going on, like I said, in Israel. And they're starting to speak out against even him. And it's given me a little bit of hope. It's like their hearts are opening up a little bit. Does it mean that their hearts are going to open up about everything and everybody? Perhaps not now, but once your heart opens up, it can't reclose. You can't close it back up typically. Now, will they have a hardened stance on a particular issue that I hold dear, and they seem to be against me? Absolutely, it's probably going to happen. But even Candace Owens, who typically doesn't say things like this, is hoping that, and she said this, she's hoping that people can set aside their political differences and come together on this one issue and help solve this issue and heal this issue. And she wasn't saying to put aside your differences and agree with everything that she's been saying all along. She's only been saying, and she wasn't even talking to her own political leaders, she was talking to the people. It's quite extraordinary. And I even listened to an interview with Tucker Carlson and Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks, and they were speaking civilly with each other, listening to each other, and they were agreeing on at least one or two issues. It was, I hate to use this, I don't want to use this word because I don't want to sound hyperbolic, but it's a miracle that this is going on. It really is. And it almost brings me to tears to see this, because this is the sign that I've been wanting, is for us to start to come together to solve some of these issues. And yet it's something that I never thought possible. And I never thought Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes and Marjorie Taylor Greene would be some of the people in the media leading the charge to see an end to a genocide in Palestine. The people in Palestine are not American. The people in Palestine are not white. The people in Palestine are not rich. The people in Palestine are not typically Christian, right? Although there are Christians in Palestine, but you know what I mean. They are totally opposite of what most people that are on the right would have any interest in. And yet they're starting to show some concern. It is a miracle. Maitreya in the 80s talked about the miracles to come, and some of the miracles that he addressed were political miracles, like the ending of the Cold War and stuff, so forth. But at the very least, these right-wingers that I mentioned are kind of having a moment like alcoholics have before they go into AA. They're having a moment of clarity. It's quite extraordinary. It really is quite extraordinary. And it goes along with what I've been saying for the last few videos, that life has just been unexpected. Some good, some bad, some pleasant, some not so pleasant. But anyway, thank you for letting me share my ideas on those things. And like I said, think about it. All right, now, Timothy Tilton. Gary, do you think 1 in 10,000 people are aware that Maitreya is here yet? I would say with absolute certainty, 100% that is true. Because I actually, to be honest with you, Tim, I couldn't do the math in my head. I actually had to go to my calculator and figure out what is the exact number of 1 in 10,000 people. It's about 800,000 to a million people. Okay, is 1 in 10,000, right? Well, even just on my little channel, which is tiny, 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 tiny. I've been putting up videos for years, and I'm able to see the analytics of my videos and the overall viewership of my videos, and it's about 700,000 views that I've had on my channel. Not too great, but it is what it is. Out of that 700,000, according to my own analytics on my own channel, 80%, which is about 500 or so, 500,000 people, right, which is way more than half of 800,000 people, are people that are hearing this information for the first time. And then there's other percentages. People might listen to 1 or 2 videos, and there might be people that listen to just 1 video, and then that's it, right? Or listen to more than 1 video. So those out of that 700,000, the 80% only listen to 1 video, and then they just turn it off, and that's it. But at least they've heard about Maitreya at that point, right? So to answer your question, I know at least 500,000 people, are hearing this information, and then that they're doing it what they do with it, right? Which is probably nothing, right? But at least they hear about it. Now, though, typically, most YouTubers would be horrified by those statistics. 80% of the people never coming back, right? To me, I actually find those to be good numbers, right? I'm not that concerned whether somebody comes back or not. I love it when you do, but I'm not that concerned about it because I'm about reaching people that have never heard this information. And then if you look at what the Share International group has done, the millions of people that they've reached over the decades that they've been putting out their information, sure, of course, right? And then even Ben said, I think he said before he died that about 25 to 30 million people have already heard about Maitreya. Perhaps it's even more now. I don't know, right? So yeah, easily. But then it goes into how many people would be interested to hear what Maitreya is saying, or how many people are wanting for the world what he's advocating for the world, for instance, right? Well, to go into what Ben said years before he passed away, is it's been said in the Agna Yoga teachings by Maitreya. Maitreya said this through Helena Roach, the disciple Helena Roach, who wrote the Agna Yoga series, that there was a time long, long ago when one true man could save the world. And then there was a time when 10,000 wasn't enough. In the coming time, Maitreya says, he will call on 1 billion people. Ben, in his curiosity, and I was there when he asked his master, and it was a very memorable event. And I know if you talk to others that were there, they would remember when he asked this. But he asked his master, "Do you have your 1 billion? Does Maitreya have his 1 billion people?" And the answer that came back from his master was 1.5. So there's 1.5 billion people in the world who will be the ones Maitreya will ask to help make the changes. Maitreya's not going to do this on his own. We have to do it. But eventually it will be all of humanity, but initially at least it will be just 1.5 billion people that will say, yes, we want peace. Let's do something about it. And yes, let's end hunger. Let's do something about it, and so forth and so forth. Do you see what I'm saying? So, that I think is also inspiring in its own way. And then the last thing I wanted to say in reference to what you were saying too is when Benjamin Creme made the announcement that Maitreya had done his television interview on January 2010, I was blown away by how much interest there was in the media about what he had said, and how many people in the media were talking about it, and how they were trying to find the interview, and there was articles all around the internet about Benjamin Creme made the announcement of Maitreya. It was crazy. And of course, they settled on Raj Patel, and Raj Patel said it wasn't Maitreya. He wasn't Maitreya. He had no idea what they were talking about. Benjamin Creme had to come out and say that he was not Maitreya, and so forth. And I talk about this from time to time, but even Stephen Colbert, the comedian that has been in the news recently because he was just canceled off his show, took some time on an episode to talk about this, and he joked about it, and he mocked Ben, and he, of course, got some laughs from his audience about it. I didn't laugh about it, but But he was mocking him because he doesn't believe in any of this. But he had to have known about it, or one of his. But it didn't seem like his producers had told him something that he didn't know, right? And this just gave him an excuse to talk about it. But I bet you he knew about Maitreya. Sure, there are a lot of people that have heard this information that aren't talking about it. There are a lot of people who believe very much so in the reality of Maitreya, or have had Maitreya experiences that aren't talking about it, right? A lot more than just in the Share International group, so that's what I would say. And then to get on to your next comment about the Dea Declaration, you said, you really feel Maitreya's Dea Declaration, that's the day that Maitreya is going to overshadow the whole world and give us a choice. Do we continue on in the way that we're doing and end all life on this planet, or do we try the principle of sharing and give ourselves a future? And of course, on that day, he will let us all know that Maitreya is a name that he's referred to as, and he's looked to as, and so forth, is going to happen next year. And we all need to start demanding we let him speak ASAP. I don't really have a feel on it either way. But based on what has been coming up in my own life about how to expect the unexpected, I would say expect the unexpected. Could it happen next year? Absolutely, Or at the very least, more and more people starting to talk about this wonderfully wise person that they're hearing on TV. That is Maitreya, who's not claiming to be Maitreya, but, that kind of thing. More and more. It's going to happen sooner or later. You know what I mean? And if the hearts, if it's true what I'm thinking about people such as Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nick Fuentes, just to name a few, there are others that are right-wingers that are talking about it in this way. I just don't remember their names per se because I don't listen to them. Those are just the names that come to my mind. If it's true that their hearts are starting to open up and they are representative of a large segment of the right, and their hearts are starting to open up at least about a few things, right? About something other than themselves, then that is a sign that Maitreya is very, very, very close to being recognized more and more as who he is. And of course, very, very close to the Dea Declaration for sure. But thank you very much for the comment. All right, Thomas Otto, amen to the talk about Luke 6:27-36. I'm glad you appreciate it. But I must admit that I have a hard time loving Zelensky these days. I guess, yeah, is that what you're talking about? Well, and it's not anything that I do perfect either. I'm not claiming to be perfect at it. But it's something to look at, to think about, and strive for. And when you fail, you get up and you do it again. And you fail and you get up and you do it again. And like I said, I really saw myself, just me personally, just my own little petty little life when I'm driving in Atlanta, in that verse in the Bible where it said to be merciful to those who are ungrateful, just as the Father in heaven is merciful to those who are ungrateful, right? And I thought about all the times I get triggered when somebody doesn't even just put up a hand like, hey, attaboy, thank you so much for letting me in, right? And they just turn their head and go in like they were entitled to do it. Oh man, that just burns me up. But I had to look at it. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I need to change my tune on that a little bit. So yeah, I'm glad you're seeing yourself in it too, and the need to do it too. That's wonderful. All right. So last but not least, Anthony Bongiorno 9870. Hi Gary, about overshadowing. On the hour-long video by Benjamin Creme, he spent a minute or two at the end by giving a blessing communication by Maitreya. Now, Creme at no time ever claimed to be the exclusive vehicle for Maitreya or being Maitreya, yet he demonstrated his presence. Is Creme's ability to do this overshadowing in the strict sense of how it's understood, or different in some way? It was only different because he was able to talk about it. Okay, so, his purpose and his job was to let people know about Maitreya. He was advanced enough, of a point in evolution enough to where he could be overshadowed by Maitreya in that way. There are others, of course, that are just as advanced as Benjamin Creme. Not as many as probably think, especially who know about the point in evolution. But there's only, I think Ben said, about 2,000 to 3,000 people that are probably at his level in the world. He wasn't comparing himself. He didn't even say that he was in that group. But what I know about Ben, I would guess him to be about a third degree initiate, and which is 3/5 of the way of becoming a master. somebody on par with somebody like Abraham Lincoln or Shakespeare or Mozart or Rembrandt or trying to think who else could be. Bach is another one. Mohammed, they were all third degree initiates, able to be overshadowed by somebody like Maitreya. But there are others, of course, that are third degree initiates in the world, and they would be, if they would also be overshadowed by Maitreya if they knew who Maitreya was. Most of those people are working in different fields than in the spiritual teaching field. So they're working mainly in the political and economic fields. Others are probably working in technology or with inventions or medicine or something to that effect, or in the social fields. And we don't even know who these people are, because they're not necessarily known for who they are, because they're not out there speaking like somebody like Elon Musk would be speaking into the world and so forth. But yet they're totally able to be overshadowed by Maitreya. And I'm sure when they're working, Maitreya is blessing their work and those around them in the same way that Ben was in a lecture, but they're just not talking about it or advertising it in that way. But sure, they're there. Ben's was able to also be overshadowed, of course, by his own master, and was able to communicate with him very efficiently without any kind of distortion. And Ben even said that just the slightest touch from him could be from his master, or the slightest look. And there were times, I know when I was in Benjamin Creme's presence, that I could tell it when it was Ben. 99 times out of 10 when I was around Ben, it was Ben. He was talking, he had a certain sarcastic kind of je ne sais quoi about him. He was a wonderful man, right? And he had a tremendous insight and wisdom in his own right. But he was, he could be a little sarcastic from time to time and a little brash, right? But then there were times when I could tell it was his master, because he had a different energetic quality to him, or a different look from him. And there was one time in the car, for instance, when he was talking about somebody, and he was talking about all the illusions and the glamours that this person had, and I just happened to just blurt out and mention to him, because it was just the two of us in the car. It's like, Ben, everything that you said about this person, I have every one of those glamours. I have spiritual pride. I have this, I have that, da, 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 da. And he gave me this look, and it was not Ben, it was his master. And he said, "You'll get it, Gary." And that has sustained me through my life in a lot of ways when it seems difficult for me to get through some things, right? Is that one comment that his master said through him. I knew it was his master. But he said that he had a very, very close relationship with his master. Of course, his master could overshadow him and give information out and wrote all the articles through him and so forth. But that was a closer relationship that most disciples have with their master, who are able to be overshadowed by a master. So it was kind of rare in its own sense. But he did say that there were others, because he had asked his master if he was the only. His master referred to him as his window into the world. And he said, "Well, are there others?" And he said, "Yes." But he never gave the number. He always said he didn't know. I'm sure Ben knew how many there were, because he was a curious type, and he probably asked his master, "How many others are there?" And he'd probably get the number. But he just wasn't allowed to say the number. But there are others that even have that kind of close relationship with Ben's own master that Ben had. Does that make sense? And then in the 80s, not long after Jimmy Carter was elected out of office, somebody asked him how many world leaders were evolved enough to be overshadowed by Maitreya. And he said there was only 3. 2 in office and 1 out of office, I think is what it was. The former president of Yugoslavia, I think is it Titan? So I can't remember the dude's name. I have to go back and look it up, because I wasn't that familiar with him when he mentioned his name. But he was a communist, and of course most people in the West would say he was an evil person, but he was able to be overshadowed by Maitreya. Fidel Castro, who of course was never really liked by the Americans and the American media and so forth, called him all sorts of names. He was not necessarily overshadowed by Maitreya, but was evolved enough to be overshadowed by Maitreya. And Ben's master actually said that Fidel Castro did more for his people than any other world leader on the stage. Actually, they all had universal health care. They're all taken care of in old age, and if they couldn't afford a house, they had a house and so forth. So he was really had a lot of the priorities of Maitreya that he was doing for the people of Cuba. Of course, the people that immigrated here from Cuba hated Castro and so forth and spoke out against him and so forth. But he was able to be overshadowed by Maitreya. And then the other one was, of course, Jimmy Carter. Now, like I said, he didn't say that they were able to be, or that he didn't say that they had been overshadowed by Maitreya, but they were able to be overshadowed by Maitreya. And I can say this because, especially Fidel Castro and Jimmy Carter are dead. They had to have been a disciple at least halfway between the second and third initiation to be able to, or 2.5 to 3, halfway to being a master, or 3/5 of the way of being a master, in order to be involved enough to be overshadowed by Maitreya. So I would say in the case of Jimmy Carter, he was probably closer to where Ben's point in evolution was, just on what he did and how he worked so hard and served humanity so long after he had come out of office, and didn't use the presidency to enrich himself as pretty much all the presidents do, right? All the presidents now are super rich compared to when they came in there, right? He actually, when he got out of office, he was broke, you know what I mean? Yeah, but yet he served humanity so much until the day he died. He was an incredible man. Of course, he had his detractors and still does to this day. People still talk about him as an awful president and blah, 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 blah. But he was a wonderful man. Wonderful, wonderful man. And of course, evolved enough to be overshadowed by Maitreya, which would put him in the top echelon of presidents and those who are evolved, probably put him up there close to somebody like Abraham Lincoln, Anyway, hopefully that answers that question. I love you guys. Thank you very much for the questions. And thank you so much for listening to these videos. And I look forward to talking to you guys again in the very near future. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.